President Trump won back that building by promising to launch the largest deportation force in U.S. history. And earlier this year, the administration claims it had removed hundreds of thousands of illegal migrants from the U.S. so far. In a new book titled Undue Process, the inside story of Trump's mass deportation program, NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley takes readers inside the Trump White House to show how key figures, including hardliners like Stephen Miller and Tom Homan, are carrying out the administration's sweeping agenda and the broader implications the plan has on the law, policy, and people's lives. And I'm happy to say that Julia joins us now with more. Great to have you back on our air.
Thank you.
We have missed you. Congratulations on the book. So the deportation program, such a signature of the Trump administration, has faded from the headlines a little bit,
right,
post-Minneapolis. But it's far from over. So walk us through some of your reporting here.
Yeah, well, I've covered immigration since 2014, many times right here with you guys. It's so good to be back. But what I started noticing in 2025 was a dizzying pace of change like I'd never seen. And so I just started methodically keeping track of everything they were doing and who was behind it. And what I found is that they were really building a machine that ramped up into what we saw in LA, in Minneapolis, in Chicago, all through 2025, really ending with the fatal shooting of Alex Preti on January 24th. So this book is going to walk you through really the undoing of the process, the pushing back on courts, the allowing people to go into homes without a judicial warrant, the targeting children for deportation, telling ICE officers they don't even need to fill out a worksheet before they make an arrest because they don't have the information on the person they're going out to arrest anyway. It's really based on the characteristics of the person they're seeing on the street. All of those things were happening. And yes, we are in a period where that machine has cooled off, but the pieces of it are still there and it could be turned back on. In fact, just last week, I was meeting with an ICE official who told me that they believe, or they were told to cool things off a little bit before midterms, but they believe that if Republicans do well, they'll be able to ramp this back up post-midterm.
So talk to us about what they have accomplished, put that in quotes, so far. I mean, they have completely, we've never seen anything like this before in U.S. history, the way they've mobilized all of government to take on this task. And it wasn't just what was promised, what Trump said during the campaign, oh, just the worst of the worst, I'm paraphrasing, will get out. Instead, it was people who have called this country home for years.
Well, it's interesting. At the end of the book, I look at the way someone has defined Trump 2.0 as ruthless efficiency. But really what this was ruthless but not very efficient. It really put spectacle over substance. In fact, of 13,000 immigrants who were non-detained in the United States who were convicted of homicide, they only have arrested about 2,000 of those. When instead, and Tom Homan told me this, it's much cheaper to go after non-criminals because they're people taking their kids to school. They're people showing up for their ICE appointments. They're people going to court to make their asylum claims. It's much harder to find someone who's hiding from the law. And so in some ways, they were efficient in scaring people not to go to school, scaring some people to deport from the country. There's a family I focus on in here who did that. Scaring children not to go to their elementary schools in Denver, scaring a PhD student at Columbia here in New York City to self-deport. But as far as really focusing on the worst of the worst and the criminals, I think people would be sorely disappointed to look at those numbers and who they've actually just deported.
And you looked at the numbers, but you also looked at the stories and the people behind the numbers. And that's why this book is so important, because we see your great reporting on nightly news, but it's quick. And here you get to really share those stories. Tell us about the horrifying story of two women who were taken to CCOT on false premises.
That's right. That story not only really hits on an emotional level, it actually breaks some new details about what happened March 15th, 2025, when there was an emergency hearing to try to pull back those planes. There were two women who were put on those planes, and actually there were 8 women. There were 2 who spoke to me, and they were put on those planes to El Salvador. They actually stopped in Guatemala for a refueling that they said took hours. So that means when the U.S. government said before a federal judge, we cannot turn these planes around because they're now in the custody of El Salvador, they actually had hours to turn them back. They never got off the planes. They stayed in the custody of ICE officers. And so they talk about getting there. They talk about the men who were taken off the planes, forcing them to sign papers to claim they were gang members so they could be turned over under the Alien Enemies Act. They talk about one woman who tried to talk to her husband and was pulled back by her hair. They talk about trying to open their windows because they were told they were in Venezuela, and they said, this is not what the Caracas airport looks like. I talked to the mother of one of those young women who was desperate to see her daughter because she thought she was coming home, only to find out she'd been sent to CICAT. Bukele actually told Trump, I won't take women in CICAT. This is a policy. And he turned them around. But it was because of Bukele's policy, not America's policy, that those women didn't end up in a prison from which they would have had no communication with the outside world.
And Julia, so much of the Trump deportation and immigration policy comes from the mind of Stephen Miller. So tell us a little bit more about what you found in terms of how he wields his power and is the architect of so much of what you report on.
What's so interesting that I found about Stephen Miller from speaking to people is that so much of this will come from flashpoints of anger. We talk about different points in the book where he doesn't think the numbers are high enough. So he ups the ante on how many people they should be arresting per day. And there's one meeting that I begin and end the book with because I spoke to a lot of people who were in this meeting taking notes. And he was increasing the number to 3,000 arrests per day. And he starts off by saying, you all know what an illegal looks like. No more trying to find criminals on your list. No more going after targets. He told people, go to Home Depot parking lots, go to 7-Elevens, find people who you think are illegal. The thing is, though, a month later, the Supreme Court said that was okay. They said that it wasn't profiling if they were going after people for more than their skin color, if they were looking at language or if they worked at a low-income job, and that that was okay to make targets. And so all of that is still sewn into our system. Stephen Miller still has a lot of this power, even though we're not seeing immigration in the headlines. He's still having daily 10 a.m. calls with the heads of CBP and ICE. He's still driving a lot of the policy there. And so that all is baked in. There's one other piece of that meeting, too, though. And you asked me about Stephen Miller, but this is really about Kristi Noem and really about the culture of that time. She introduced Corey Lewandowski, who's her right-hand man, and said, this is Corey. He'll rip your face off. And there's a little laughter in the room, but it really spoke to this culture of fear. And a lot of people I spoke to, in fact, there are 3 employees at DHS that I spoke to for the book who were fired because they spoke out and tried to resist. But in the end, a lot of people had that fear. Okay, he'll rip your face off, whether that's metaphorical or not. Hopefully it is. I'm going to keep my head down and keep pushing forward with these policies, whether I agree with them morally or not, is really where a lot of people walked out from.
Yeah, and again, the policy there, flatly un-American. It's un-American, and it's great reporting in here. The new book, Undue Process, the inside story of Trump's mass deportation program, comes out tomorrow. Its author, senior Homeland Security correspondent for NBC News, our friend Julia Ainsley. Julia, thank you. Congrats again on the book.
Thank you, guys.